Are you wanting to increase your rent by using Form 4, which is the statutory form you have to use if you want to increase rent using Section 13? Well, the form's a little bit tricky, but I'm going to talk you through it and show you how to fill it in. This is one of several ways that we can increase rent at the moment, but once the Renters' Rights Act comes into force later this year, it will be the only way that we can increase rent. It's a bit tricky to do, so I'll go through it now. And at the end of the video, I'll explain the Section 13 process and how it's going to change when the Renters' Rights Act comes into force. If you'd like a written guide to look at afterwards, it's on my website on this link, theindependentlandlord.com/section-13. First of all, when can we actually use a Section 13 Form 4 notice at the moment? Well, you can't use it in a fixed term tenancy unless it's going to come into effect at the end of the tenancy. So that means we can only use it during a periodic tenancy or just before the end of the fixed term tenancy. You also can't use it if there's a rent review clause in the tenancy agreement. It will be null and void, the Section 13 notice. And so you will have to keep using the rent review clause unless you change the contract to say something else. Okay, so where do you find Form 4? Well, it's here on the government website, and do always go to the government website to make sure that you're using the most up-to-date version, because they do change it from time to time, and they will be changing it, I'm sure, when the Renters' Rights Act comes in, because it is changing a little bit. The first bits are okay: the name of the tenant, the property, who it's from, whether it's the landlord or a letting agent, and make sure you have the right landlord on it, the one that actually owns the property, unless somebody else does the management. And you put in the rent and how often it's payable, and make sure that you cross out the week and the year if it's a monthly rent, and vice versa if it's a weekly or yearly rent. The tricky bit is question 3. It says, the first rent increase date after the 11th of February 2003 is ... Now, there are historical reasons for this question, and it does seem a little strange. But what the date you need to enter is the date that the very first Section 13 Form 4 notice you've served on these tenants after 2003. If you're serving notice for the very first time and the new rent will start on 1st of April 2025, then in this box 3, you must write the 1st of April 2025. And don't put the date of the notice, because that would be wrong. It has to be in box 3, the date that the rent will come into effect. And if you've increased the rent by another means, say by agreement, an addendum or a renewal, then don't put that date in. You only put in the date if you previously used Section 13. The next one is box 4, and it says the starting date for the new rent will be. So this will be the start of the next rent period. And so that's not the date that they might happen to pay the rent, but it's the date on which the rent is due. And you can find that out from your tenancy agreement. In box 5, add in the details if bills are included. And don't forget to sign and date it. So how much notice do landlords need to give? Well, at the moment, if your rent is paid monthly or weekly, you need to give at least 1 month's notice before the date you write in box 4, in other words, the starting date. And it's best to give a little bit more than a month to make sure that you've got clear days. And remember that if you serve the notice by person after 4:30 on a day, it doesn't count that day. It's the next working day. And if you serve it at the weekend, then it has to be the following Monday, if the Monday is a working day. If the rent is quarterly, you need to give 3 months notice. And if the rent is paid once a year, then you need to give 6 months notice. Well, when will the new rent come into effect? Well, assuming that the tenants don't appeal it to the First-tier Tribunal, then the new rent will come into force on the date of the notice. So this means you don't actually need the tenants to sign anything like you do with an amendment or an addendum. What you have to have is them not do anything, and then it will come into effect. So they mustn't appeal it. So at the moment, if the tenants appeal the rent increase to the First-tier Tribunal, the tribunal will look to see what the market rent is. And they do that by getting experts. They might visit the property, and they'll also consider evidence that the landlord and the tenant submit. And if the rent in the notice is below the market rent, then the tribunal has the power to increase the rent to the market. And so, therefore, it's really risky at the moment for tenants to appeal a Section 13 notice to the First-tier Tribunal, because they might end up paying even more rent than the landlord was asking for. And so once the First-tier Tribunal has made a decision, apart from in exceptional circumstances, the new rent will normally be payable from the start date that's in the notice. So how's this going to change with the Renters' Rights Act? Well, as I said, the notice will be the only way to increase rent once the new tenancy system comes into force. And instead of the minimum of 1 month's notice that we have at the moment, landlords are going to have to give 2 months' notice instead of the 1 month's notice, and plus a little bit extra for service. And tenants are almost being incentivized to appeal the rent to the First-tier Tribunal, as this will delay the start of the rent increase until after the First-tier Tribunal has come to a decision. And also, they're not going to have any risk, because the First-tier Tribunal will only be able to keep the rent the same as in the notice or reduce it. They won't be able to increase it to what is actually the market level. So if you got this far, then hopefully you found this useful. And please subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out on new videos. I'm a new channel and I'm putting out lots of things all the time. And it would also be helpful if you could give me a thumbs up. And if you'd like to find out more about what's happening to rent in 2025, check out this video. And if you'd like to understand the new rules for landlords and tenants in the Renters' Rights Act, you can watch this free training course, Renters' Rights Bill Explained. But don't worry, I keep it light. See you soon.